Corporate Finance Excel practice problem. In this presentation, we're going to work a practice problem in Excel related to the cost of not taking a cash discount. This will be similar to a prior practice problem, but this time we're going to work through an example which will make the concepts more concrete. Get ready, it's time to take your chance with corporate finance. Here we are in Excel. We have our information on the left-hand side. We're going to put that into the blue area into our worksheet on the right-hand side. Note that there are 2 tabs down below. You may have 4 tabs if you're working along with us in our Excel example file. 2 tabs will have the answer to it. 2 tabs will be the practice worksheets that you will see here. If we go to practice tab 2, you'll see we have a similar layout, different numbers. We will get to that practice tab. It will be slightly different once we go to it. So our information is going to be on the left. We're going to assume that we can borrow from a bank at 22%. So we can borrow money at 22%. Then we're making purchases. And we have these payment terms with regards to what we are purchasing. So remember, when we are purchasing something in our cash management strategy, we're going to pay as late as possible, as long as we can pay as minimum as possible. So if you look at these terms, then remember these terms mean, if you see something slash 15 and 60 in this case, so 3.5 slash 15 and or net 60 means 3.5% if you pay within 15 days, otherwise pay within 60 days. So in other words, if it was to say just net 30 or net 60, then we would simply wait until the end of the time period and pay at the end of the time period in order to maximize our cash management. So they are now imposing on us or are telling us, hey, we'll give you a 3.5% discount if you pay within 15 days. Now, typically you would think that would be better if we could pay, within the 16 days and we had the cash to do so, then generally that will be beneficial to do. It would be a benefit to do. But what if we're financing this option, right? If we're saying, okay, if I got to finance the option, should I finance the option to then pay for it within the 15 days, or should would it be better, since I have to pay interest on the loan, which we're saying 22%, wait till 60 days in order to pay at the end of the time period and not to get to the discount? So that's going to be our scenario. So we'll have then our information. So I'm just going to break this out. So that this means that you get a 3.5% discount, which is 0.035. I'm going to make this a percent, go into the home tab, numbers, percentifying it, and then adding a few decimals or adding 1 decimal. And then the discount will be 3.5 if you pay within 15 days. Otherwise, you have to pay within 60 days, or you'll have collection action and whatnot that could be taken on you after that point in time. So let's apply out our formula, which is the cost of not taking the discount, which is going to result in a percent. And that percent, then we can compare to what it would cost for us to finance, to borrow the money. And if the percent here is higher, then the cost of not taking the discount would be higher than the loan. Then we would want to take the loan in that case. Okay, so that's going to be the concept. So we have this calculation similar to what we did last time. Then we'll kind of prove this concept with our data down below, with our kind of test data, assuming that we have amount of the 100,000, the discount then being the 3,500, and so on. So let's do this calculation. We're gonna break this out in our table kind of format, like we're making a tax return of it, or like we're making a worksheet from it. We're gonna basically do the algebra here. I want to have these, do this calculation first, and then have it in the outer column. Then do this calculation, have it in the outer column, then multiply them together. That's how I'm gonna break out this problem, so we can see it in a worksheet format. So we're gonna have the discount percent is gonna be the first item. Discount percent, going to put that in the enter column. That's going to be the 3.5%. So I'm going to say that's going to be equal to the 3.5%. Let's percentify that cell. Go into the home tab, numbers, percentifying it, adding a decimal to it. Then we're going to take the 100% minus the discount percent. So 100% minus the discount will be equal to 1 minus the discount, which is going to be the 3.5. And be careful, because once again, this is in percentage form. When I said 1, that's like 100% in decimal form. If we percentify this, we're going to go to the home tab, numbers group, percentify. Let's add a decimal or two. 96.5 is what you would expect there, right? Because 100% minus the 3.5% would give you 96.5. So home tab, fonts group, underline. I'm just going to simply call this a subtotal, simply subtotal. Just subtotal, but I'll call it simply subtotal because it sounds good. So I'm going to go to the home tab, alignment, increase the indenting, and now we're going to divide that out, get into the end point of this first half of our calculation, that being the 3.5 divided by the 96.5. Let's add some decimals here. Go into the Home tab, Numbers group, and Percentify. Adding a few decimals. I'll bring it out a few decimals because this is generally a fairly small number. Then we're going to be taking the second half, which is 365, or the number of days in the year. So I'm going to call it days in year 365, which we're assuming nice even 30-day months. So 30 times 12 is how we get to that 365, divided by, and we're going to say this is going to be the final due date minus the discount period. So the final due date, you got to pay within 60 days. If you don't take the discount, you got to pay within 15 days. So if we pay at the end of the day for our cash management strategies, we're either going to pay at the end of 15 days or we're going to wait all the way out till 60 days. And therefore, the difference that we have in terms of the time period is going to be the 60 days end of the non-discount period minus the 15 days end of the discount period, 45-day difference. Let's have another subtotal. And I'm going to indent that, Home tab, and alignment, increase the indenting. We'll divide this out now. This is going to be equal to the 360 divided by the 45. Let's put an underline under the 45, Home tab, font group underline. I'm going to add a couple decimals here, even though I don't think I need to. Home tab, number, add a couple decimals. Then that's going to give us the cost of not taking the discount. Cost of not taking the discount is going to be equal to, now we have these two components, we can multiply them together now. This 3.6 so on percent times the 8, that's going to give us 0 until we percentify it. Go into the Home tab, Numbers, Percentifying, then we'll add a couple decimals to it. Let's put an underline under the 8, Home tab, font group, and underline. So 29.02. So because the cost of not taking the discount from a percentage format is higher than the cost of us borrowing, it would be beneficial for us to then borrow. That's going to be what this basically means here. So let's prove that. Let's do an example problem and say, okay, let's make that a little bit more concrete. Can we kind of prove that? Well, let's say that we have the amount that we're talking about, the amount that we are purchasing. We're purchasing something and we have these terms on it that we're going to be purchasing for. So 3.5. So we're gonna be purchasing something for $100,000, and they tell us, okay, if you get a 3.5% discount if you pay us within 15 days. If not, you have to pay us within 60 days. That means the discount's going to be $3,500, which is going to be the 3.5% times the 100,000. So if we were to pay then within the 15 days, we would have the 100,000 minus the 3,500, or the 96.5. And I'm going to make these blue, so it'll be something that you can calculate. So if we were to calculate these items, the discount would be equal to the 100,000 times the 3.5. So if we pay within the discount time period, we're going to be paying the 100,000 minus the 3.5, the 3,500, or the 96.500 instead of the full 100,000. Okay, so now let's see if we could say, okay, well, so if I took out a loan then, if I took out a loan to pay it within the discount time period instead of waiting until after the discount time period is over, so would it be worth it to do that? I'm going to say, well, we'd have the amount, it would be for the 96.500, and then we're going to say the rate we think we can finance at is equal to the 22%. 22%, so let's percentify that. Home tab, Numbers group, percentifying it. Let's underline it, Home tab, font, and underline it. Notice this is basically this formula here. So we're saying interest is the price times the rate times time. This is a little bit confusing of a calculation because time is really a ratio of the year. So we'll see that in a second here. So in any case, I will typically break this out as we're going to say the loan times the rate. What would that give us? That would give us the interest as if we had this over a year's time period. Because whenever we see an interest rate, it's basically a yearly rate that we'll have to break down to the fraction of the year. And that's our next step. That's going to be multiplying it times time. So I'm going to say, all right, we got the 96.5 times the 22%. We would be paying $21,230 if we were paying interest on the entire year, but we're only paying interest, of course, for the difference between the 60 minus the 15 or the 45 days. So now we have to basically think about, the fraction of a year. So you could think about it as 45 days over the total days in a year, we're going to estimate at 360. Or you can think about it as breaking it down into basically, this is just two ways you can calculate this time factor. This would be for a year. Let's break it down to what the interest would be per day. So we'll do it in this format, interest per day. So we're going to say days in a year, let's say, is going to be equal to the 12 times 30, or 360. Let's underline this, home tab, font group, underline. That would give us then the interest per day. So if we're going to break down the interest amount per day, then we would say, all right, this is going to be equal to the 21,230 divided by the 360, about that. In terms of the interest per day, let's add some decimals, home tab, numbers, adding a few decimals. That would be the interest about per day. And how many days are we covering here? This is going to be equal to the days we're covering, which is going to be the final due date minus the discount period, because that's how many days we're going to be outstanding, because we're going to pay at the end of 15 days instead of waiting at the end of 60 days. That's a difference of 45 days that we're talking about. So 45 days, home tab, font group, underline, and then that means that the interest that we would have here, if we calculate the interest, then is going to be equal to this times the 45 days. Let's add a couple decimals, home tab, numbers. We'll add a few decimals there. Also note that you could factor in this time factor a different way. I could have just jumped right here and said, all right, the time factor is going to be 45 divided by the 360, the percentage of a year, percent, adding a couple decimals, and then simply take the 21,230 times time, which is going to be this item, and that'll get us once again to this same number. So, and that fits kind of with this formula. The time factor is a little bit confusing. Just note the time factor is a little confusing in the formula. All right, so then that means that, of course, this interest that we're talking about here is less than the 3,500, and that's why it would be beneficial to take out the loan and make sure to pick up that discount. Now, let's further try to prove this and say, well, what if I did this kind of same calculation and I used a rate that is equal to this number? We should end up with this same discount period. This would be kind of like a break-even type of analysis. So for example, let's say this is going to be equal to the loan principal. I'm going to copy this down using autofill. So we're going to autofill this all the way down. I'm going to format paint this by selecting this entire blue area. We're going to go to the Home tab, Clipboard, Format Painter, format paint this entire thing, and then we'll do this calculation again. I'm going to say, all right, this is going to be equal to the 96.5, the loan. The rate now, let's assume the rate this time is equal to the cost of not taking the cash discount, and see what we end up with. We should end up with the 3,500, right? Because that would be kind of like the break-even point. So let's add a couple decimals, Home tab, numbers, add a couple decimals, and so there we have that. And then let's multiply this out. This is going to be equal to the 96.5 times the rate that we have there. We're going to say the number, so that would be for a year interest if it were for a year, but it's only for 45 days it's outstanding. So I'm going to say let's divide by the number of days in a year, which we're going to round to 12 times 30. 12 months times 30 days, 360 days. This then equals 28,000 divided by the 360, which gives us about 77.77 so forth per day. And now we're going to say, all right, then if I take the period, the 60 minus the 15, it's only going to be outstanding for 45 days. So we'll pick up the 77.77 so on times the 45 days, and we get to the amount of the discount. That's why if the loan was equal to the 29.09, we would come out to, it would be a break even at whether we take the discount or not at that point in time. That's what this number basically means. So if you can get a loan for something under that, then you will come out cash positive between the two scenarios. If it's over that, then you're going to be negative, and if it's exactly that, then you'll have a break even. Let's take a look at one more time. Let's do this one more time. Second tab. So similar process, and we'll just break this out again. So we're going to say, all right, we're going to assume we can borrow the money at 22%. We purchased something. We're not going to be specific about what yet or how much. We will when we get to our example problem down here. I'm going to delete these and make these blue right now because I'm going to calculate these instead of making them a given. So we're going to say we bought something and we said the terms then of what we purchased, we have to pay them back. Terms 210 net 65. That means 2% discount if you pay within 10 days. Otherwise, you pay us within 65 days. Let's write that down here. It means you got to get a 2% discount, 0.02. Let's percentify this. Home tab, number, percentify. If you pay it within 10 days, if not, you got to pay it within 65 days. Then we're going to do our calculation based on this formula. So here's our formula. I'm going to break this out in a kind of worksheet type fashion, which would be very useful in practice. So you can plug this information into worksheets as you work through this in the future. And so we're going to say, okay, I'm going to do this calculation, and then the outer column, I want to have the component or the outcome of this calculation, then this calculation, and the outcome in the outer column. So I'm going to say, all right, we have first the discount percent. So the discount percent is going to be equal to the 2% over here. So that's the numerator of our first component. Let's percentify that. Home tab number percentify. We're then going to say that we have the 100% minus the discount. So I'm going to take that from over here. 100% minus the discount, because I think I misspelled it in my 100. Here it is. And then so we're going to say this is going to be equal to 100%, or 1 minus the discount 2%, which is 0.02 in decimal format. Let's percentify that and see if it gets us where we would think we should. Home tab numbers percentify, that'd be 98%. That makes sense, 100% minus 2%. Then we go to the home tab, font group underline, and we're going to have then the subtotal, which is going to be in our outer column now. That's going to be breaking out this first half. This is going to be equal to the 2% over the 98%. Let's percentify that by going to the home tab, number group, percentifying it. We can add then some decimals to it. Then I'm going to indent here, home tab, alignment, indent. Now we're going to do the second half. 360 is the number of days in a year. This didn't get aligned. This was supposed to do that. So the days in a year, I'm going to say, okay, this is days in a year, which we're going to round to 12 months times 30, or 360. And then we have the final due date minus the discount period. The final due date, if we don't take the discount, being 65 days. If we do take the discount, being 10 days. So this is going to be equal to the 65-day end time period minus the 10 days. So that's a difference of 55 days. So 55 days is the difference we're talking about. Home tab, font group, and underline. We'll then have the subtotal, bringing this into the outer column. So we're going to have the calculation of this second half in the outer column here, which is going to be equal to the 360 divided by the 55, adding some decimals, home tab, numbers, adding a few decimals here so we can see the rounding of it. Let's indent the subtotal. So, hold on a second. Something funny happened. Okay, now we're going to indent the subtotal, home tab, alignment, indent, and that's just going to be the cost of not taking the discount. So cost of not taking the discount finally being equal to the 2.04 and so far percent times the 6.5455 something percent. And we go to the home tab, number group, percentify that. Let's add a few decimals there. Let's add an underline up top, going to the home tab, font group, and underline. So note here, we're going to say, okay, now this number, the cost of not taking the discount, is lower than what we can finance for. And therefore, we would say, no, we don't want to take the discounts if we have to finance the purchase at the 22%. We'd rather just wait until the time period passes, the 65 days under that condition. Well, let's run that through our scenario and double check that down here. Let's just run a practice problem. We're going to say, okay, well, what if we were buying something for about $100,000 again? And then what would be the discount? So we bought it at $100,000. They're going to give us these terms: 210 net 65, 2% discount if you pay within 10 days. Otherwise, pay within 65. So if we pay within the 10 days, we can then get a 2% discount, which would be equal to the 100,000 times the 2% discount up top, which means that we would only pay, this equals the 100,000 minus the 2,000. We would pay 98,000 instead of 100,000. We would pay, 98,000 instead of 100,000. All right. So what if we took out a loan to pay that 98,000? and we took it out so we could pay the loan, and we're talking about a period of so many days, 55 days of the loan. Okay, so we're gonna say, all right, we're gonna use this formula and calculate what the interest would be. We're gonna modify this formula a little bit, but interest is calculated by principal or the loan times the rate times time, which is kind of the confusion point, which is going to be the fraction of a year. So we'll break that down. Okay, so we're going to say the loan is going to be equal to the 98,000, because we're only going to have to pay 98,000 because we paid within the discount period we're assuming here. And so this is then going to be equal to the rate, which is going to be 22% up top, 22% on the rate. Let's go ahead and percentify that rate by going to the Home tab, Numbers group, percentifying it. Let's underline Home tab, Font group, and underline. And that would give us the interest if it were for an entire year, because that's what interest means. 22% means for a year, and then we have to break it down to, in this case, the 55 days. So the 98,000 times the 22 would be interest if it were for an entire year. Now we could take the fraction of a year, which would be 55 over 360, or we could say, okay, that would be for an entire year. Let's break it down to a per day basis, because we're talking about a number of days, and then multiply times that number of days. Same thing. So we're gonna say, all right, well, let's divide by the days in a year, and we're gonna assume that there's 12 months times a nice even 30 days. We're gonna underline that. That'll give us the 360. Home tab, Font group, underline. This will then be equal to the 21,560 divided by the 360 days. Let's add some decimals. Home tab, numbers, add a few decimals here so we can see the rounding involved. This would be the interest per day. And then if we said, how many days are we talking about here? I mean, how many days are we talking about? Well, this would be equal to, we would be paying at the end of 65 days if we weren't taking the discount, but we're going to pay at the end of 10 days. The difference between the two, 65 minus 10, 55 days. That's what we're talking about. So we've got then Home tab, Font group, underline. That means that the interest for the 55 days would be equal to the interest for 1 day times 55 days, which would be about that. Let's add some decimals. Home tab, numbers, adding a few decimals, and you'll note that this number is now greater than the discount, and therefore you would think that it wouldn't be a good idea to do that, and we'd rather just not take a discount. Let's be like, whatever, we'll pay you in 65 days at the end of 65 days. Now, if we can kind of prove that, well, what if we did the same calculation with this number? You would think that would get us to a break-even point, which would be 2,000. And then we would be even. So we would be even there. So let's try that. Let's do that. That'll be fun. So I'm going to go down here. We're going to do the same thing. This was going to be equal to the loan amount up top. I'm going to copy that down using the autofill. So I'm going to put my cursor on autofill, drag it on down. Let's go format the entire thing and selecting this entire thing, and then format paintbrush it by going to the Home tab, Clipboard, Format Painter, and then paintbrushing down here. All right, now we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to say this is going to be equal to the 98,000. The rate is still going to be that. Well, the rate now, this is what changed. This is different. This is going to be the 1336. 1336. We're just going to say that number, see if we get to the break-even point. So we're going to go then to the Home tab, numbers, add a few decimals there. Multiplying this out, this is going to be equal to the 98,000 times that 13.36 something. And let's add a couple decimals here. Home tab, number group, adding a couple decimals. Is that necessary? Did I do that up top? Did I add decimals here? Let's add decimals just to make it even. Didn't need to. I didn't need to up there. Anyways, that would be interest for an entire year. Interest for an entire year. Let's break it down to interest per day. So interest per day would be equal to, let's say 30. How many days in a year? 12 times 30, about 360. We're making it nice and even. So if I take the interest per year divided by the number of days, that means that would give us the interest per day about, and then we'll multiply that times the how many days we're talking about. How many days are we talking about here that we're going to take this loan over? Well, 65 minus the 10, we're talking about 55 days. So we're going to say, all right, let's take that 36 something per day times these 55 days, and that does indeed get us to the 2,000, which you would expect it to. That would be in the break-even point. So again, bottom line, this calculation will give us a percent. If we're going to finance the purchase, then if we finance it for something, this is the cost of us not taking the discount. So if we can finance it for something less than that, a percentage less than that, beneficial. If we can finance it for something, if we have to pay something over that, as we do here, not beneficial. And you can kind of prove that with just basically testing this out and calculating the interest on it under the two scenarios and seeing whether it makes sense or not.